23. The time for members' statements has concluded. If members just entering the chamber now can take their seats. It being 2 p.m, questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Yesterday he boasted about his record on aged care with a list of more than 15 announcements. Does the Prime Minister recognise his announcements are not matched by delivery? How is it that after 7 years of this Liberal government, a Royal Commission chooses the word neglect to describe the sector, a resident has ants crawling from open wounds, and over 450 have died from COVID-19?
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for his question. And the Royal Commission, which I initiated soon after becoming Prime Minister, Mr Speaker, was designed to ensure that all in this place, and some, like the Leader of the Opposition, have been in this place for quite some considerable time. And the Royal Commission has observed, as have many outside the Royal Commission, Mr Speaker, that the challenges that we have in aged care are not the product of just 1 or 2 years, Mr Speaker. They are the product of 30 years of how policy has impacted on the aged care sector. And, Mr Speaker, it is important that as we seek to address the issues that the Royal Commission will be, I'm sure, identifying, and as we, as I outlined to the House yesterday, have even since the Royal Commission, Mr Speaker, announced numerous measures that are being implemented and have been implemented and will continue to be implemented to address the very significant issues and challenges that are in aged care. The government, Mr Speaker, does not walk away from those challenges, and we have done everything we can to ensure that a light is shined upon, Mr Speaker, shine upon the challenges that are in aged care sector. And we back that up with the commitment that during the COVID period alone, Mr Speaker, we have contributed an extra $1.5 billion to address the critical needs that exist in that sector. Now, Mr Speaker, every single death that has occurred as a result of COVID or has otherwise occurred in the aged care sector, or where there has been, Mr Speaker, issues of neglect, or where there has been issues of a failure to come up to standards by operators, be they public, private or not-for-profit. These are the challenges that we are addressing, and we will continue to address. And I invite the opposition to join us in the measures that we will put forward and continue to put forward to address these very significant issues.
Just before I call the member for Grey, I just remind the House the photographers will be shooting again from the 3 ceremonial doors that are open and from the 2 open doors that are behind me. I call the member for Grey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister outline to the House how the Morrison government is working to give Australians the hope and certainty they need to plan for their futures despite the impact of COVID-19, pandemic and recession?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Grey for his question. In May, nationally, we agreed to a plan to reopen Australia. That was informed by the work of our own cabinet, and indeed the cabinets of state and territory governments all around the country. And we had ambition that that plan would be achieved in July. That plan included the movement of Australians between states and territories, interstate travel, and state and territory premiers, together with myself, committed ourselves to that plan. And much has been achieved as a result of that plan. 7 out of 8 states and territories have been able to gather considerable ground against the virus in opening up their economies all around the country. But it is true that the second wave that has occurred in Victoria has stalled that progress, and in some cases, in many cases, it is involved in that progress receding. Mr Speaker, that has obviously cost lives, and it's cost livelihoods as the second wave that has occurred in Victoria has impacted in Australia. But Victoria has turned the corner, and we are planning together with the Victorian government to reopen Melbourne and to reopen Victoria. In discussions last night between myself and the Premier of Victoria and the Premier of New South Wales, that is our commitment, to see Australia opened up again, to see the New South Wales-Victorian border opened up again as soon as it is safe to do so, and I welcome that cooperation from the New South Wales and Victorian governments. We must, though, return to the ambitions that we set out in May for that plan to open up Australia again. And by Christmas, Mr Speaker, we should aim for Australians to be able to go to work, to be able to be with their family at Christmas and to return, to visit their friends and to look forward to a positive 2021, Mr Speaker. We cannot resign Australia to being a dislocated nation under COVID-19, Mr Speaker. What we must plan to do is by Christmas, Mr Speaker, we must work together to ensure we have the protections in place to protect the health and safety of Australians and to open up our economies and ensure the ambitions of our federation are returned to again and they are not resigned as a victim to the coronavirus, Mr Speaker. That is what our plan is, to work together with the states and territories to reactivate the plan that we first set out in May and made great progress towards. There is much to be achieved. There are borders that are in place now, and that is understandable. But what we have to work to do is to let Australians know is that by Christmas, Mr Speaker, they will be able to come together. By Christmas, Mr Speaker, they will be able to come together as families and look to a 2021, Mr Speaker, that doesn't look like the difficulties that they've gone through in 2020. That is what our government is seeking to do. And that is what we are committed to doing, and we are committed to doing it with everyone in this country, every government in this country who will come together behind that ambition.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has failed to listen to aged care residents, providers and even the Royal Commission he established. Isn't Council assisting the Royal Commission right to say, in direct response to the Commonwealth's evidence, it's difficult to learn a lesson if you don't think there's one to learn? Why is the Prime Minister focused on a list of announcements instead of taking action to protect aged care residents? Is it the case that if actions speak louder than words, the Prime Minister truly is the quietest Australian?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Glib lines, Mr Speaker, from the Leader of the Opposition.
Members on my
Mr
left.
Speaker,
The Prime Minister will pause for a
deaths in
second.
aged care.
The Prime Minister will pause for a second. The Prime Minister will just take his seat. The level of interjections is far too loud, and I'll start ejecting as fast as you're interjecting. Manager Opposition Business was seeking the call.
Speaker, an unparliamentary term was used and asked it to be withdrawn.
Well, that's fairly general. I mean, I'm going to repeat the point ad nauseum. It's very hard for me to hear these when there's a wall of interjections coming over the shoulder of the Manager of Opposition Business. So all I can do is say if anyone used an unparliamentary term, I'd like them to withdraw it. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And what the government will do will respond to issues and questions that are raised by the Royal Commission by simply presenting to the Royal Commission the information and the facts as the government has presented here in this place as well. Mr Speaker, the $1.5 billion in response that we've made already to the COVID, Mr Speaker, the COVID crisis that has impacted on this country. And the Leader of the Opposition interjects again. Mr Speaker, aged care funding in Australia increases by more than $1 billion every year, and on top of that, Mr Speaker, a further $1.5 billion has specifically been provided to aid in the support of the response to the COVID pandemic. Now, Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition can assert many things. He can make many claims, but that doesn't make them true, Mr Speaker, as the Australian people have learnt about the Labor Party when it comes to financial management and the truth, Mr Speaker. These are two things that seem to elude them on these matters. The issue of responding to the coronavirus challenge with aged care, Mr Speaker, is incredibly significant and incredibly important, and we are applying ourselves to those challenges with the resources that are necessary and have been called upon, in particular by the aged care sector, in particular with the extension of measures already put in place by this government and extended again earlier this week in response to the requests from the aged care sector, as we've carefully considered where the state of the pandemic is up to, and we have made the decision to extend that support further because of the nature of the challenge that we face. But the Minister for Health may wish to add to my answer.
Thank you very much,
Minister for
Mr
Health.
Speaker. And adding to the Prime Minister's answer, the Leader of the Opposition asked about actions. There are 4 principal actions we've taken over recent years to significantly and dramatically improve the quality. We recognise the statements made by the Commission, which did, I would note, refer to actions over decades, not just over one short period. Specifically, firstly, a massive injection of funding from $13 billion to 22, 23, 24 and 25 billion, and then there's the additional $1.5 billion for COVID the Prime Minister mentioned. Secondly, the calling of the Royal Commission and the extension of it. Thirdly, the creation of the Quality Indicator Program. Fourthly, the creation of the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission, which indeed has so far conducted this year 1,180 visits to different aged care facilities to help protect, to help save and to help improve quality.
And I call the member for Mallee.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. Will the Deputy Prime Minister inform the House how the Morrison-McCormack government is supporting regional Australia's recovery from COVID-19 pandemic through the extension of JobKeeper?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to commend the member for Mallee. I want to commend her for her work on the border issues, and I want to commend her for her courage in standing up for what she knows is right. Mr Speaker, regional Australia, as the member for Mallee knows, it's the engine room of our economy, and it is going to lead the way out of COVID-19. And that's why we as a government invest in the infrastructure needed to boost productivity, to boost safety, to add to water security and indeed to make sure that tourism is what it needs to be right across the country, right across the nation, from Manangatang to Manjimup, right across the Nullarbor. That's what we're doing. We're making sure the right investments are in the right place at the right time, and certainly to boost regional Australia. Investment in regional Australia is a critical part of the path out of COVID-19. Over $100 billion in the pipeline over the next decade, supporting 85,000 jobs, many of them in regional Australia. Thousands of these jobs are on the ground right now, and the government's contribution of $50.4 million to the Western Highway in Victoria, that's supporting 65 jobs in regional communities. And our pipeline of investment plans jobs for the future, a vision for the nation, for the future, member for Sydney. Though we know in these unprecedented times we need to stick to the plan, we are making sure that we put that vision in place. JobKeeper extending through to March, that's making such a difference. Peter McAllister, the General Manager of True Foods, which took the plunge and decentralised from Melbourne to Maryborough in 2011, creating more than 160 local jobs, has expressed a deep gratitude for the Treasurer and the JobKeeper that is in place. He said, without JobKeeper, we would have laid off many of our 185 staff, but with the payment we can train people and increase depth of operational knowledge. COVID has created serious mental health challenges with an uncertainty of employment, but JobKeeper has provided management with an ability to step in and provide hope and stability. They're really strong, compelling words. Elliott Newspaper Group in Mildura runs the local newspaper, the Sunraysia Daily, a great publication. I've read it often. This year it's celebrating its centenary. Ross Lanyon, the Chief Executive Officer of Elliott Newspaper Group, has said thanks to JobKeeper. The Sunraysia Daily actually ceased printing there for a stage because of COVID-19, but thanks to JobKeeper it's been able to resume publication. Without JobKeeper we wouldn't be here, Ross said. The difference is to be able to envisage a way forward because there is breathing space to plan, budget and manage the way forward. JobKeeper has removed the guillotine from over our head. That's what he said. That's what others are saying. I've had so many people say that but for JobKeeper their jobs and their livelihood.
And I call the member for Franklin.
So my question is to the Prime Minister. Why does the Prime Minister boast about a list of more than 15 announcements but not mention his biggest contribution to aged care, his $1.7 billion cut which left aged care residents more vulnerable to the deadly COVID-19 virus?
Members on both sides, the Prime Minister has the call.
Again, Mr Speaker, the Labor Party continues to make these assertions that even ABC fact-checked, Mr Speaker, has ruled against them on these things, as they did before the last election. And at the last election, Mr Speaker, the ALP supported the government's policies when it came to in-home aged care, and despite the fact having policies that would see $387 billion in higher revenue from their higher taxes, how much were they able to put aside from that $387 billion to support more in-home aged care places, Mr Speaker? The answer to that is nothing. Nothing. Absolutely nothing, Mr Speaker.
Rankin, the Treasurer.
By contrast, we put forward a plan for 10,000 additional in-home aged care places. But not just did we delivered on that, Mr Speaker, but we went further than that for a further 10,000 places and a further 6,000 places beyond that, continuing to ensure that we are doing everything we can to meet the very significant needs that exist in these sectors, Mr Speaker. And by say these sectors, I mean the in-home aged care sector and the residential aged care sector, where our funding goes up more than $1 billion every year. Now, Mr Speaker, these are just statements of fact. These are things that the government has done. What we understand as a government is there is much more to be done, and we understand that the mountain we are seeking to climb when it comes to dealing with the challenges in aged care is significant. And we understand, Mr Speaker, as we have over each and every year of the past 7 years, increased funding by more than $1 billion every year to ensure that we are meeting the challenges in aged care, and there is more to be done, because we still need to close that gap on the needs that are there, and we will continue to do that each and every year, Mr Speaker, because, like everyone in this chamber, we want to ensure that elderly Australians are treated with dignity and with respect and can get the care and support that they seek, whether it's in a private facility, a public facility or a not-for-profit facility, Mr Speaker, and we have backed that up by the significant commitment of resources each and every year of government we have had the responsibility for these matters, Mr Speaker.
It's actually the independence question now. All right. Well, I'll just give the option, so that's okay. No, we can come back to it. I'll just call the member for McKellar. I think that'll make it easier.
Nice to be with you, Mr Speaker.
Just before you go, it might be Bob's question. We'll just go with the flow. So, yeah, he was here yesterday.
I'll do my best impersonation.
Well, if it's your question without notice.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question
just hang on a second.
Oh, sorry.
I am going to come back because I didn't have notice. Okay, now broadcasting might have had notice. I didn't have notice of that, so I'm going to stick to the terms of the agreement. So we'll just go to the member for McKellar. Okay, third time lucky.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm happy to be lucky any time. My question is to the Treasurer. Can the Treasurer please inform the House as how the Australian economy is going compared to other economies that have been similarly impacted by the pandemic?
Treasurer.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for McKellar for his question. Acknowledge his experience in small business in both the health and the financial services space before coming to this place. He's no fan of modern monetary theory, Mr Speaker, but he is a great supporter of his constituents and of good policy in this place. Mr Speaker, COVID-19 has wreaked enormous havoc across the global economy. The World Bank has forecast that more economies will contract this year than at any time since 1870. The OECD have said that they expect the global economy to contract by 6% this calendar year. In comparison, during the GFC, at its height in 2009, the global economy only contracted by 0.1%. The International Labour Organisation has said as a result of COVID-19, effectively 500 million full-time jobs have been lost. And the impact, Mr Speaker, on GDP in the June quarter across the world has been staggering. In the United Kingdom, it's been around 20%. In France, it's been around 14%. We recently saw the numbers from Canada, which were 11.5%. In Germany, it was 10.1%, and in the United States, it was 9.1%. Tomorrow, we will get the national account numbers for the June quarter, and the expectation is that the fall here will not be as large as we've seen in other countries around the world, indicating the remarkable resilience of the Australian economy, indicated by the fact that of the 1.3 million Australians who either lost their job or saw their hours reduced to zero since the start of this crisis, Mr Speaker, around 700,000 have got back to work, Mr Speaker. More than half have got back to work. There's been 340,000 jobs that have been created over the last 2 months. Of those jobs, 58% have gone to women and 44% have gone to young people, Mr Speaker. The fact of the matter is...
Just for the member for Rankin who interjects a lot, if you're interjecting on your own repeatedly, it's probably a bad sign. Okay? Okay?
Mr Speaker, the only numbers the member for Rankin are interested in, the ones he's telling against the Leader of the Opposition.
No, the Treasurer will be relevant to the question.
The only ones he's telling against you, Mr Speaker. The only ones he's telling against you. Now, Mr Speaker, the fact of the matter is the Australian economy has been remarkably resilient. And our job maker plan is helping to get more people back to work, Mr Speaker, more people back to work. And we will, while those opposite will continue to talk down the Australian economy, we will continue to implement our job maker plan, helping to create a stronger economic recovery and to help more Australians get back to work.
I'm now going to call, we'll get back in sync. I'll call the Leader of the Greens.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. For many parents, childcare is expensive, the waiting lists are often long and places aren't available where they need them. Today, parents, business and community groups are calling for the government to act by transforming Australia's system into Swedish-style quality, universal and accessible early childhood education. Prime Minister, will you use the upcoming budget to make childcare universal and free?
The Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for his question. And what we have done in government since we introduced changes to the childcare subsidy 2 years ago is to make sure that those who earn the least get accessible care, get affordable care. And what that has meant is that for parents there has been a 3.2% out-of-pocket reduction in costs since the childcare subsidy came into place. And not only that, it has led to participation increasing, and in particular female participation increasing. We've seen a 6% increase in female participation. So the subsidies, the changes that we've put in place have worked, and what it's enabled us to do is to ensure that the support is there for the sector, and it's also enabled us to provide support for the sector through COVID-19. And can I once again take this opportunity, and I'm pretty sure it's World Educators Day tomorrow, to thank all those early educators who have supported the childcare sector throughout this COVID-19 pandemic. The work that they have done is outstanding, and can I, on behalf of the parliament, thank them for all the work that they have done, helping us carry the sector through COVID-19. And it's been quite extraordinary what the childcare sector has done, especially for essential workers throughout COVID-19. We have been able to keep 99% of childcare facilities open throughout the pandemic by providing support, and we are continuing to provide support to the sector, especially when it comes to those childcare providers in Victoria and in particular in Melbourne, who are still facing an incredibly difficult time as a result of the Stage 4 restrictions in Melbourne and the Stage 3 restrictions in the rest of Victoria. And our hope is, as Victoria recovers from the pandemic, we'll be able to keep those supports in place for Victorian childcare providers so that they will be able to provide that care for parents as they seek to get back into the workforce as those restrictions are lifted?
Okay, so we'll go to, just to get it back on track, I'll go to the opposition and then we'll be back on track. And just, as I said, I didn't have notice of the Leader of the Greens trying to remote in with a question. So as I said, we require notice. It was all there, it's part of the agreement. So unless we get notice, you won't be called. So, and as I've, just to be very clear, I've got no notice today of anyone asking any questions remotely at this point. The member for Jellybrand.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Elizabeth's mum contracted COVID-19 at Benetes St George Residential Aged Care in my electorate. Elizabeth says that when her mum was taken to hospital, they found she had a secondary chest infection and a urinary tract infection and had been left in soiled nappies for hours on end. Why does the Prime Minister boast about a list of aged care announcements when residents and their families know the tragic reality of the gap between the Prime Minister's announcements and his delivery?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, first of all, for all those who have been involved with the very difficult conditions at Benetes St George's, there have been 31 patients that have contracted COVID at that facility. 28 members of staff and 6 people have lost their lives to COVID at Benetes St George's. There are currently 2 residents who are currently in hospital. Benetes St George's notified the Department of Health that it had a positive case on the 7th of July, and the Department of Health tailored specific support as soon as this notification occurred. Testing of residents and staff commenced on the 9th of July. The Australian Government has provided a range of surge workforce to assist the facility. AUSMAT teams also provided on-site advice. The Department of Health and the Victorian Aged Care Response Centre will continue to provide intensive support to Benetes St George until its outbreak is resolved. All impacted aged care services in Victoria are receiving assistance from the government, including case manager, PPE, testing support and workforce support, Mr Speaker. The initial testing I noted occurred on the 9th of July, and regular testing, retesting occurred, including most recently on the 31st of July, the 4th, the 7th, the 11th, the 18th, the 22nd and the 23rd of August, and staff and residents may be tested on separate days. Workforce included Aspen Medical Clinical First Responder on site, AUSMAT on site on the 14th, 15th, 16th and 19th of August, and an interstate team. And we are so thankful to those interstate teams that came from other parts of the country to assist with the workforce support that was needed in our aged care facilities, particularly including at Benetes St George's. Mr Speaker, they are the responses the government has put in place to the very serious conditions that emerged at Benetes St George that followed on from the significant community outbreak of COVID-19 across Victoria. And, Mr Speaker, we will continue to deliver those responses, including giving support to OPAN, which assists with communications with families, including the provision of PPE out of the National Medical Stockpile. These are our responsibilities, and that is what we are doing to deliver support to that facility. And all the families of those, particularly, Mr Speaker, of the 6 people who passed away in that facility, we extend our deep sympathies and condolences. And we also thank all the staff, including those who have come from other places, to support deal with the very serious and acute conditions that emerged at that facility.
And I call the member for Reid.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline to the House how the extension of the Morrison government's JobKeeper program is saving businesses, especially in my seat of Reid?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Reid for her question and acknowledge her extensive experience as a businesswoman, as a psychologist and as someone who has a PhD for her research around children with autism, Mr Speaker, and I acknowledge that experience before coming to this place. JobKeeper has been a remarkable program. They're not my words, they're the words of the Governor of the Reserve Bank of Australia. At $101 billion, this is an investment in protecting people's lives and livelihoods. And today, JobKeeper is supporting more than 3.5 million Australian workers and around 1 million Australian businesses, Mr Speaker, and we are seeking to pass legislation through this parliament today which will see the extension and the expansion of this remarkable program, with effectively an extra $30 billion being put to work, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Australian people. And this legislation will also include important regulations around labour market flexibility, Mr Speaker. Labour market flexibility has been critical to the JobKeeper businesses being able to keep their doors open and to keep their staff employed through this crisis, Mr Speaker. Now, there are remarkable stories in every corner of this country about JobKeeper, like in the electorate of Bass, Flinders Island Aviation, like in the electorate of Boothby, Mr Speaker, with Central Audio Visual, Mr Speaker, like in the electorate of Curtin, Barchetta Cafe, Mr Speaker, like in the electorate of Higgins that we heard recently, very special kids, a children's hospice, Mr Speaker. We have heard right across the country, including F45 Jim in the member for Ryan's electorate, Mr Speaker. Around the country there are remarkable stories. There's also a remarkable story in the electorate of Reid, Mr Speaker. And Mr Speaker, it relates to the Children's Tumour Foundation, a small not-for-profit supporting parents with children suffering from neurofibromatosis, Mr Speaker. It's based at the 5 Dock in Sydney, and they have 5 people on JobKeeper. This is what Ruth said about the remarkable JobKeeper program. It's a complete lifeline for us. It's been able to keep us going in these very turbulent times when we've got more people impacted and needing our services more than ever before. This is the JobKeeper program, supporting lives and supporting livelihoods. The JobKeeper program is helping to keep people in a job, Mr Speaker. The JobKeeper program is helping the national economy, Mr Speaker, and the JobKeeper program is helping the well-being of millions of Australians.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Why is the Prime Minister not only neglecting older Australians of today in aged care, but neglecting older Australians of tomorrow by failing to deliver on the increase to their retirement savings in superannuation that he announced on the 7th of November 2018?
The Prime Minister has the comment.
Mr Speaker, let me speak first of all, because I know the Leader of the Opposition has raised this in other places when it comes. I know he's raising a separate issue here, but just to put pensioners' minds at ease, Mr Speaker, when it comes to the impact of the... This is an issue of concern to older Australians, Mr Speaker, and I'm sure that the opposition won't
Members
object
on my
to
left.
letting older Australians know that those who are on the pension and those who are dependent on these types of benefits, that because of the very extraordinary and irregular impact on the indexation of how these things work, that the government will be making announcements to ensure...
I just know, but before the Manager of Opposition Business, I won't give the Manager the call at this point. I'm just going to say to the Prime Minister, the question had 2 parts. One was about aged care and the other was about changes to superannuation. And so whilst he might want to speak about the concern with respect to pensions, he'd need to get a question that asked that to talk about pensioners. It was very specific about aged care and about superannuation. Prime Minister.
Speaker, I just want to assure, in concluding on that element, that we will...
Members on my left.
Mr Speaker, if those opposite aren't interested in this issue, then that is a matter for them.
No, the Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business will resume his seat. The member for Shortland has been warned he will leave under 94A. I've just got to make the point to the Prime Minister that the question was very specific. It referred to aged care and superannuation. The Prime Minister has
We
the
will
floor.
address the matter that I was just referring to, and we look forward to making those announcements when the decisions have been made, Mr Speaker. I don't accept the assertions and smears that the Leader of the Opposition has asserted in relation to the government's position on aged care, and already during this question time I have outlined the responses that the government has made, in particular in relation to specific facilities when questioned on those matters by members opposite. I'll ask the Treasurer to add further the answer on the other matters raised in the members'
The
question.
Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I asked about the superannuation guarantee, an issue that the government is working through, Mr Speaker. But when it comes to the issue of the increase in the superannuation guarantee, this is what the Governor of the Reserve Bank, Dr Philip Lowe, said, Mr Speaker. It's relevant to the question.
If the member for Gorton could cease interjecting, the Treasurer resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. On relevance, asked about, very specifically, the Prime Minister's own commitment that he made on the 7th of November 2018 on superannuation, which he said, yeah, we've got no plans to change the legislation when it comes to the SGL that's been in place for some...
The Treasurer will just pause for a second. Presume you want me to rule. So, yeah, as I said, I mean, the question was about potential changes to superannuation. It might have had other sentences in it, but I think the Treasurer is in order to talk about superannuation and the government's
thank you, Mr. Speaker.
position on any potential
the Leader
changes.
of the Opposition would have been interested in the words of the Governor of the Reserve Bank. When asked about the increase in the superannuation of guarantee, he said the following: increases of this form do get offset by lower wage growth over time. It would certainly have a negative effect on wages growth. There will be less current income. If there's less income, there may be less spending, and if there's less spending, there may be fewer jobs. The Grattan Institute, Mr Speaker, said the following: increasing compulsory super contributions in the midst of a deep recession would slow the pace of recovery. Mr Speaker, ACOS have also made comments about it, as well as the COSBOA representing small businesses. The reality is...
The member for Sydney is now...
The reality is, Mr Speaker, and you will see this tomorrow with the national account numbers, that the Australian economy has been hit hard by COVID-19. We are working through these issues and taking into account the comments and the insights provided by a number of people, including the Reserve Bank of Australia.
The Leader of the Opposition seeking to table a document.
I do, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister's transcript of 7th of November 2018, in which he said, we want to make sure that Australian workers actually get these additional increase, which goes to their future superannuation.
I'll just be quick. I mean, it's probably a publicly available document, but is leave granted. The Leader of the House.
It's not granted.
Leave is not granted. I call the member for Sturt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General and Minister for Industrial Relations. Will the Attorney please update the House on how the Morrison government's JobKeeper flexibilities are helping to protect Australians from the economic effects of the pandemic?
The Attorney-General and Minister for Industrial Relations.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question, because he understands how absolutely critical these flexibilities are. And the dual approach of the government in dealing with COVID-19 has always been to navigate both the health and the economic imperatives. As the Treasurer noted, we've been saving lives and saving jobs, and trying to navigate both of those two imperatives in a balanced way. What the flexibilities that were built into JobKeeper number 1 and now the JobKeeper number 2 system did was save jobs, likely hundreds of thousands of jobs across the country. And we are now hearing from the businesses and the employers about those jobs that were saved. An RSL in regional New South Wales, they said the flexibilities these laws have permitted enabled us to retain all of our regular, casual and permanent staff in paid employment during this period. If we had not received JobKeeper and the laws enabling these flexibilities, we would have been forced to implement redundancies. An architecture firm in Adelaide, JobKeeper flexibilities have been essential to our survival through this global pandemic. Without the government's introduction of these temporary legislative provisions, we would not have been able to retain employees and our business would have been at risk. a restaurant manager in Brisbane, Mr Speaker. Because of the flexibilities, we were able to get our staff to perform other tasks, such as maintenance throughout the closure, and keep these workers employed. The flexibilities have been so important to sustain our business during the closure as well as during the reopening. And our position in JobKeeper number 2 has been very, very clear. We think that if a business was on JobKeeper number 1, so they had a turnover of more than 30%, but they don't re-qualify for JobKeeper number 2, but they nevertheless still have a very significant decrease in their turnover. So if they're what we call a legacy business, so for instance a business in JobKeeper number 1 that had a 70% decrease in its turnover now has a 20% decrease in its turnover, we think that business should still be able to have the flexibilities available. And why? Because that saves the business and it saves individual jobs in the real world. Members opposite, their position is also very clear. They said, in the words of the member for Watson, we don't agree with that. What they are not agreeing with is the continuation in a protected, clear, rational way for another 6 months that will save Australian jobs and save Australian businesses. And what's most disappointing about the fact that they simply do not agree is that we modelled that second 6 months of flexibilities on an agreement that was reached between the unions and the AHA, which members opposite endorsed, even though it did not have the protections that we have built in.
And I call the member for Rankin.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Treasurer's announcement that, and I quote, "The Morrison government is providing an unprecedented $314 billion in economic support, the equivalent of $12,500 for every Australian man, woman and child." End quote. How much of this announced support has actually been delivered by the government?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, let's go through it. In relation to the cash flow boost, 785,418 recipients have received $24.1 billion, Mr Speaker. In relation to economic support payments phase number 1, which is in relation to the $750 payments, 7.3 million people received $5.5 billion. In relation to economic support payments phase number 2, 4.9 million have received $3.7 billion. In relation to the coronavirus—
The member for Rankin's, I've already asked him to cease interjecting. I've got to say, there's lots of complaints in question time. He's asked a very direct question, and the Treasurer is answering it very directly, and he's still interjecting. He does not have to add it up for you. He does not have to add it up for you. He's giving the figures. The Treasurer has the call.
Quit, Mr Speaker. The member for Rankin should quit while he's ahead and say no more. Mr Speaker, the coronavirus supplement gone to 2.3 million people at $9.7 billion, Mr Speaker. In terms of JobKeeper, 996,388 businesses, Mr Speaker, with more than 3.5 million employees have received $42.27 billion, Mr Speaker, and that program is costed at $101 billion. The reality is, Mr Speaker, we're getting on with the job of helping businesses stay in business and people stay in jobs. Now, Mr Speaker, when it comes to our $314 billion, which is a 15.8% of GDP, we'd also like to see the states contribute more, Mr Speaker, because their contribution, Mr Speaker, has been around 2.4% of gross state product, Mr Speaker. That is in comparison to our 15.8%. Now, Mr Speaker, we hear from the member for Rankin. He often is complaining about debt and deficit, but then asking us to spend more, Mr Speaker. We're asking a member for Rankin. He'd been asking for a transition down from JobKeeper. Now he said he's not in favour of a transition. The member for Rankin said people on JobKeeper were getting paid too much. Now he wants the people on JobKeeper to be paid more, Mr Speaker. The member for Rankin is jumbled. His head is jumbled with all these different facts and figures. The member for Rankin should no longer be known as the member for Rankin. He should be known as Jumble Jim, Mr Speaker.
The Treasurer will withdraw that term.
withdraws Jim.
Members on my left will cease interjecting.
You should refer to members by his title. Mr. Speaker, I refer the term Jim.
No, the Treasurer will withdraw.
I withdraw.
And I'm just going to say to the Treasurer, he's not going to get the call if he does that. And I'll tell you why I've been strict on this. He might find it funny now, but I know for a fact when the boot's on the other foot, ministers don't appreciate it, and they are the first to complain. The member for Berowra has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Will the minister update the House on how the Morrison government is supporting the health, including the mental health, of Australians through telehealth and record bulk billing rates?
The Minister for Health. Member for Rankin, we're not going to have a sort of interparliamentary debate over the course of the next question. Okay, you both need to contain yourselves, or you can have the debate outside the chamber. The Minister for Health has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Berowra. He has been a great advocate for suicide prevention in this place, along with the member for Eden Monero, who has now retired, but others such as the member for Fenner and the member for Reid on this side, and so many have been involved in the focus on mental health. One of the great challenges of the pandemic has been providing health care during the course of a global pandemic, and in particular mental health care during the course of that. In order to deal with it, in March we established whole-of-population telehealth. There have been some questions today from the opposition about delivery. I'm very happy to inform them that 28 million services in that time have been delivered through telehealth. Over $1.4 billion has been invested in the provision of telehealth services. And these are services for Australians who are elderly in their own home. They'll support Australians who are in aged care homes. They'll support all Australians, immunocompromised, people who might have difficulties in leaving home, and they've been protecting doctors and nurses and healthcare workers at the same time. As a consequence, one of the things that's occurred is we've seen record bulk billing rates rise still further, rise from just over 86% to 87.5%. I'm advised an all-time bulk billing record for the year to 30 June. This means that we're helping to provide the services, but we're helping to provide more affordable services. And I think that's a positive outcome in the most difficult of times. Very significantly, of course, though, when we look at Victoria and we ask ourselves why is it that 5 million Melburnians are under curfew because of a mass community outbreak. 5 million Melburnians are unable to leave their homes for 23 hours a day unless it's for work or for medical reasons or for shopping. Why is it that we have shops and businesses closed? Because of a mass community outbreak. Because of that, we've had a special need to deal with mental health. 59% of mental health services in Victoria over the last month have been delivered via telehealth. And what that means is that for a population under pressure, for a population facing a mass community outbreak, they've been able to get that support, mental health and physical health, through telehealth. And these things together are saving lives and protecting lives. They're giving people contact, and above all else, they're giving people real and profound hope.
The member for Gorton.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Treasurer's announcement the Small and Medium Enterprise Loan Guarantee Scheme is providing an unprecedented level of support to SMEs and will help businesses move out of hibernation, successfully adapt to the new COVID-safe economy and invest for the future. Prime Minister, how much of the announced $40 billion in support has been delivered?
The Treasurer.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. 17,652 businesses have so far received $1.7 billion, and as you know, we've extended and expanded the criteria which allows those loans to have a greater tenor of up to 5 years. Previously it was 3 years, Mr Speaker, up to $1 million. Previously it was $250,000. It's been a very important program. I don't know what the honourable member has against the government partnering with the banks to help small business, Mr Speaker. What does the honourable members opposite have against supporting small business, Mr Speaker? What do they have against supporting small business? What do they have against—
Treasurer will pause. Some people are about to leave the chamber. Seriously, the level of interjections is unnecessary. Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The harsh reality of COVID-19 is that it has had a significant impact on small businesses right around the country. And we all know that small business owners are often the ones who are first into their office or to their shop, and they're the last to leave. They work at the front of the office or the shop, and they work at the back, in the back office, Mr Speaker. And they have received unprecedented support from the Morrison government through this crisis. And that support has been very varied. It's either been through the JobKeeper payment, which has helped support their workers keep a job through this crisis. It's been through the cash flow boost, which has helped meet their working capital requirements through this crisis. It's been through the SME loan guarantee. And right now, more than 17,500 businesses are benefiting from that government partnership, our government's partnership with the banks.
The member for Moore.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Skills, Small and Family Business. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government's JobKeeper program is helping protect small businesses and their employees from the economic effects of the pandemic?
The Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Skills, Small and Family Business.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. Now, he's a great advocate for small businesses because he's had first-hand experience at running and operating his own business. So he understands just how hard it is for our businesses. Now, Mr Speaker, we are all aware of the ongoing impacts of this pandemic, and this government has implemented, we're delivering a number of very practical solutions that are going to help individuals, families, small businesses and communities. So let me start with the jobs task forces that we announced this morning. These are flying squads that are going to be going into the regions that have been the most hard hit. And what those squads are going to do is that they're going to look to tailor support, to develop some local plans, and they're going to help people get back into jobs as part of the road to recovery. Now, Mr Speaker, we know that successful businesses are the keys to creating jobs in our community, and of course JobKeeper is very central to that plan. It certainly helps businesses to keep their doors open. Now, there are countless stories that we have all heard about how JobKeeper has been a lifeline for so many businesses and, of course, for so many workers. And just one example is a business owner called Lorraine at the Peppermint Green Coffee House in Joondalup in the member for Moore's electorate. Now, she says that her 8 staff are like family to her, and JobKeeper has meant that she's been able to keep them over a very stressful period when she was forced to close. Now, that business is back up and running again, and as Lorraine says, they are contributing back to the community. Now, Mr Speaker, it's very important to remember that when we talk about the economic crisis, it's not just about the budget bottom line or figures on a business balance sheet. It's about people's lives. When businesses close, there's an enormous toll that's taken. People lose their jobs and they fall behind on their mortgages. Families struggle with paying their household budgets and they endure emotional and financial stress. And that's why the support that this government is offering is so important, because this is about supporting people at times that they need it the absolute most. So, Mr Speaker, what this government is doing is making sure that we are supporting individuals, families and small businesses in particular. We are making sure that Australia is clearly open for business, and we are supporting those small businesses as they support their workers through this COVID-19 pandemic.
The member for McMahon.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. On the 19th of August, the Prime Minister announced Australia had a deal with the drug company AstraZeneca to secure a COVID-19 vaccine. But AstraZeneca said there was no deal and a local manufacturer had not been found. Why did the Prime Minister's announcements never match the reality?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Shadow Minister for Health has a habit of coming up with all sorts of sledges that always end up proving not to be true, Mr Speaker, and I'll ask the Minister for Health to update further.
The Minister for Health.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And unfortunately for the Shadow Minister for Health, he neglected the second part of the discussion that day, where AstraZeneca actually wrote to the paper in question and rejected their statement, reaffirmed that that which they said next to the Prime Minister, noted that they had struck an agreement with the government, that this was the first stage and the most important stage. This is the first and the most important stage, and is a written agreement between the government and AstraZeneca. I think the Shadow Minister will have a very difficult time in the future when he looks back on the fact that we will have delivered whole-of-population vaccines for Australia. That's right. That is the future to come, that we will have delivered it. We have a written agreement with AstraZeneca. We have signed that agreement. It's my name on that agreement. And as the person who had worked it with them, as one of this team which had the authority of the Expenditure Review Committee to do that, we have put Australia in a position where we are now at the forefront of those countries which will have access to vaccines. AstraZeneca isn't the only vaccine I would also mention. We are working with a variety of other companies around the world. We are working in terms of Australian manufacturing production with CSL. So what we will see is that the Australian population will be given access to whole-of-population vaccines on a free basis, which is one of the fundamental pathways for the road out for Australians. So we have containment and we have capacity. The ultimate capacity is that vaccination. It happens that we are in a fortunate position because we have Australian manufacturing capacity on top of our access. Indeed, we also have within Australia an over $350 million COVID vaccine preparedness and treatment program. That includes the investments in the University of Queensland molecular clamp, a $5 million investment, but also $25 million of additional funding for clinical trials, which was announced only in the last 10 days. So all of these things have come together as part of our capacity structure: primary care, aged care, hospitals and vaccines. And in particular, we have a written agreement which with AstraZeneca is the first and the most important part. We have advanced negotiations with other companies, and we have production capability as well as the capacity to be part of the Gavi-COVAX international facility.
And I call the member for Moncrieff.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment. Will the Minister please update the House on the Morrison government's JobKeeper program is helping to protect Australia's tourism sector from the economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic?
The Minister representing the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Moncrieff for her question, and can I commend her on the forum that she held on the Gold Coast, the Reimagine Gold Coast Forum, and I know the tourism sector, the local Gold Coast tourism sector, played a big part in that forum, and her passion for tourism and for her local electorate was to the fore with that Reimagine the Gold Coast Forum. And I know there are many Victorians who are waiting with bated breath to be able to go up and visit the Gold Coast, as I've no doubt there are many Australians who are making sure that they can go and visit the Gold Coast. Tourism is incredibly important to Australia. In 2019, the tourism industry was worth $152 billion. 1 in 13 Australian jobs depend on tourism. 95% of tourism businesses are small businesses. And in 2019, Australia had met and surpassed the tourism visitation and spend targets under our 10-year Tourism 2020 strategy, a year early. All that, of course, was before COVID-19 struck. Now, importantly, our tourism sector is very strong domestically, with 70% of our tourism industry driven by domestic visitation. So we are there to support the tourism industry, as I know all Australians are, by making sure that they continue to use tourism as a way to take a holiday, go to events and do other things which will help all the small businesses in the tourism sector. But the government has also provided additional support through JobKeeper, cash flow payments, apprenticeship and trainee support and assistance for financially distressed businesses. Now, these are in addition to Tourism Australia's record and growing budget, which will be used to directly support the domestic tourism industry through marketing campaigns when it is safe to do so, especially internationally. We have also established a $1 billion COVID-19 relief and recovery fund to support regions, communities and industry sectors that have been disproportionately affected, including the tourism sector. And can I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his stewardship of that fund to make sure that we've been able to provide assistance like $100 million in regional airlines funding assistance, $198 million in regional air network assistance, $94.6 million to support exhibiting zoos and aquariums, $27 million for arts-related organisation, key drivers of tourism. The government wants to make sure that we're there to support the tourism sector. We know that it's driven mainly by small business sector, and we know it's so important for jobs. 1 in 13 jobs in Australia dependent on the tourism industry.
The member for McMahon.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the previous answers. Isn't it the case that at least 17 countries have signed and sealed at least 49 agreements to secure potential COVID-19 vaccines? Together, these deals guarantee over 6 billion doses, but Australia hasn't actually signed a single deal for a single dose. Why has the Prime Minister provided false hope with a big announcement of a deal which simply doesn't yet exist?
The Minister for Health.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I'm very pleased to respond to the member for McMahon's question. And let me quote specifically the response of AstraZeneca to this so-called claim. This is what they wrote to the authors of the article in particular at Pharma in Focus. We stand behind what was stated at this morning's press conference between the Prime Minister, Professor Kelly and ourselves. AstraZeneca is thrilled. Your interpretation is incorrect. We have not questioned the veracity of the letter of intent. We have never questioned the deal. I just want to repeat the phrase from AstraZeneca. We have never questioned the deal, and we are not perplexed about the agreement. The deal and the agreement. We are really disappointed with the approach Pharma in Focus has taken. Deal, agreement, signed Melissa Millard, Head of Communications, AstraZeneca. Now, I am sorry if those two words offend the Shadow Minister. I realise that this is not the portfolio he wished for. It's not the position he chose. And it shows because there is not much work or research. He got very excited. He got very excited about two words, deal and agreement, and they're the words from AstraZeneca. But stepping back, where is Australia in all of this? We are in the fortunate position that because of our onshore manufacturing capacity, because of the ability to work with CSL, because of the ability to deliver whole-of-population support, we have been able to identify carefully, as one would want, the best in class of the vaccines, the most capable, the most prospective, the most likely to deliver an early outcome a safe outcome and an effective outcome for the Australian population. And that's precisely what we've done already with AstraZeneca, but more is to come, as well as the onshore manufacturing and therefore the delivery of whole-of-population vaccination outcomes. And you know why? You know why we can do this? Because we've just delivered record vaccination rates in Australia as well for 5-year-olds. We've also delivered on the PBS. We were not the ones that stopped the listing of medicines. We were not the ones that held up the funding for the PBS, in particular for medicines for schizophrenia and medicines for endometriosis. These are the things that they stopped. So we'll deliver whole-of-population vaccine exactly as AstraZeneca has said, through whether you call it the deal or the agreement. Both are their words, but that's what we'll deliver the Australian people.
The member for Wentworth.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications, Cyber Safety and the Arts. Australia's creative and cultural sector contributes $112 billion to the Australian economy every year. Will the Minister please update the House on what the Morrison government is doing to protect Australians in this industry from the economic effects of the pandemic, including through the extension of its JobKeeper program?
The Minister for Communications, Cyber Safety and the Arts.
Well, I do thank the member for Wentworth for his question. He's got a strong commitment to our cultural and creative sector, which, as he rightly says, generates $112 billion of economic activity each year. And for everybody who cares about this sector, it's been troubling to see the impact of COVID, with performances cancelled, venues closed, artists losing their gig. That's why our government moved quickly to respond through JobKeeper and JobSeeker, providing support for those in the sector unable to work. Now, while we moved quickly, sadly the Shadow Minister was out there deliberately spreading fear and uncertainty in the sector, making the completely factually incorrect claim that JobKeeper was not well suited to the arts sector. Well, let's have a look at the facts. 90% of people who work in the cultural and creative sector are in employment arrangements which make them eligible for JobKeeper. You know, there are around 40,000 people in what the ABS calls the performing and creative arts subsector, and in the first month of JobKeeper, around two-thirds of them, two-thirds of people in that subsector, received JobKeeper. In fact, to date, JobKeeper has delivered $336 million to people in this sector. So the Shadow Minister was precisely and completely wrong. But not content with spreading fear, what did we get from this repeated visitor to Ediabead Ski Lodge? He also moved, Mr Speaker, a second reading amendment to the government's bill to deliver $130 billion of support to COVID-affected Australians. He claimed misleadingly that this would have delivered more support to the arts sector. The facts are that if his amendment had passed, it would have ended the entire bill. There would have been no support for any Australians, including those in the arts sector. Now, we've had a series of false claims from the Shadow Minister. He claimed there was no support for the arts for 100 days. That was wrong. Around $100 million flowed into the creative and performing arts subsector in April through JobKeeper and through cash flow payments. And of course, just a few weeks ago we announced our $250 million JobMaker plan for the cultural and creative sector. Labor was running out of new material by that point. The best they could do was claim that it didn't support the visual arts. I tell you what, they were wrong on that as well. As we come out of COVID, our cultural and creative sector has a vital role to play in lifting our spirits and telling our stories. Our side of the parliament has been delivering unprecedented support to the arts sector. Labor's just been trying to scare them.
The member for Blaxland.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing. When the Home Builder scheme was announced on a freshly laid lawn in a housing estate 3 months ago, the minister said it would spark a tradie-led recovery of our economy. The Treasury says, as at the 14th of August, that only 39 people have applied to renovate their home. Why does the government always make a big announcement but never deliver?
The Minister for Housing.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And the
The Shadow Minister has
Members on my
very old
left.
figures there. We've got to date a few updates to what he has outlined. We've had 3,500 applications. In the first week that Victoria opened up their applications for Home Builder, we had 1,100 applications in a week.
Member for Rankin.
Since Home Builder was announced, on the 4th of June, we've seen new home sales increased by 77%.
The Minister will just pause for a second. The member for Bruce will leave under 94A. I've warned a number of people a number of times, just to remind them, in case they've forgotten, the member for Sydney, the member for Rankin, and I've got all the others written down. I won't detain the House, but you should know who you are. If you don't, bad luck. The Minister has the call.
So the Shadow Minister needs to engage with the sector more, because if he does, he would understand that a 77% increase in new home sales in the month after Home Builder led to the head of the Master Builders Association to say, this is the most effective government stimulus that we have seen in decades. The most effective government stimulus we've seen in decades. A 77% increase, in new home sales in the first week. In the first week that Victoria opened up formal applications, 1,100 applications in Victoria alone. Now, the Master Builders Association, the Housing Industry Association, have been lauding this scheme day after day, and if the Shadow Minister paid any attention to it, he wouldn't ask foolish questions like the one he just asked, because this program is keeping hundreds of thousands of tradies in work. Not just tradies on building sites, not just the bricklayers and the carpenters, but the manufacturing
Members
workers.
on my left.
The manufacturing workers who make the bricks and the glass and the tiles. The timber mill workers who make the frames and the trusses. Now, the chief economist at the HIA, in contrast to what the Shadow Minister has just said the following: Home Builder has arrested the decline in new home sales and will protect jobs in the sector into 2021. Now, Treasury estimates 27,000 new projects, whether they are new home sales or substantial rebuilds, will fall into the Home Builder scheme. HIA and the MBA are far more optimistic than that. So at the moment, we've seen new home sales increase by 77% in the first month since the announcement. We've seen the two main industry bodies, the Master Builders Association, the Housing Industry Association, repudiating everything that the Shadow Minister says. We stand on the side of new home buyers and home ownership. Whether it's the First Home Loan Deposit Scheme, which has seen more than 10,000 people accessing their first home, whether it's people who will receive this $25,000 grant, we are on the side of new home buyers, we're on the side of tradies who work in the construction sector, and the Labor Party can oppose it all they like.
The member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and my question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Women. Will the Minister update the House on how the Morrison government's economic support measures, including its JobKeeper program, are assisting women during the COVID-19 pandemic?
The Minister representing the Minister for Women. Member for Rankin and the Treasurer.
Thank you very
about
much.
to go out on a job lot. Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Robertson for her question. She, as part of the Morrison government, is closely monitoring the economic effects from the coronavirus on all Australians, especially and including women. Our significant economic support of almost $305 billion, that's around 15.3% of GDP, is helping cushion the economic shock. We're taking unprecedented action to strengthen the safety net for Australians who lose their jobs, and sadly we know that a disproportionate number of those are women, mainly because they are heavily represented in sectors that have sharp decreases in paid work, hospitality, tourism and retail. The JobKeeper payment is helping keep Australians in jobs, and we know this has been an incredibly welcome measure, including in Robertson, where Natalie from Crocstar's Swim School in Terrigal contacted my good friend the member for Robertson to say, if it wasn't for JobKeeper, my staff would have gone upwards of 14 weeks without pay. The day this payment was announced, I breathed a huge sigh of relief, knowing I could support those staff members who've been loyal to me during this difficult time. And that's the key feature of JobKeeper, Mr Speaker. It keeps women, whether they're employees or employers, connected to work and connected to each other. We're extending the JobKeeper payment until March 2021, and we know that that will help those female-dominated industries such as accommodation, food services and retail. Mr Speaker, increasing women's participation in paid employment will assist in accelerating Australia's overall recovery as the economy begins to revive. And it's encouraging to see that we've seen around 200,000 jobs returning to women as the economy has started to reopen in most places across Australia. None more challenging, I must say, than around our borders. And as someone who represents the New South Wales-Victorian border, I was pleased to see the Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, coming to Albury today to say that border is not going to be open one day longer than it needs to be. Thank you, Premier. What's next, Mr Speaker? Well, we will refresh our $158 million Women's Economic Security Plan. That has 17 initiatives. One that's particularly relevant to rural women is the Career Revive initiative that supports women who step away, whether it be on farm or in their community, and come back to their career later. Women's economic security is about two things. It's about economic participation, workforce participation and financial security. And the Morrison government's commitment to supporting women through the pandemic and beyond is absolutely paramount.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice.
Thank the Prime Minister.